Irish Nation, it is the college football playoffs. We are here to preview the first round of the inaugural on campus 12-team format starting off in South Bend, Indiana. Mike, we're going to see each other, I guess, in less than a week from time of recording right now. We'll see each other here in 5 or 6 days in South Bend. Pumped to see you, man. How are things going?
Likewise, dude. I'm just pumped for this next week. I feel like each day is painful in the sense that I'm not at the college football playoff home game yet. But yeah, I got the tickets, got a place to stay, got my plane tickets booked. So yeah, excited to see you, Brad. Excited to see a bunch of other friends we're gonna have there. It's funny how the mindset kind of shifted just based on the opponent. I think before we knew we were playing IU, I wanted it to be as cold as possible. I was hoping it would be like a blizzard, negative 20-degree wind chill. And now that we know that we're playing IU, who's a team that's also from the north, my mindset just completely shifted. I would like an unseasonably warm game. If it was like 60 degrees, I'd be like, all right, that's perfect. Like we don't need cold weather. We're playing a team that's not going to be impacted by that anyway, so might as well have it be as enjoyable as possible. Now I know some people have different opinions on that. I know some people would like to have a nice snow game just because the optics of it looks cool on TV. But in terms of tailgating and going to the game, if it's unseasonably warm, especially now that I live out in LA, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to me.
So from Atlanta, I've gotten very soft living in Atlanta, but originally I grew up in Minnesota. So Ann and I, my wife and Ann and I actually are in Minnesota right now for an early Christmas with my family. And it was -10 when we got off the plane on Thursday morning. So we are, I guess, getting some practice in before South Bend, but picking two very cold destinations. I was just looking up the forecast. Last I saw, Friday has a chance of flurries, a chance of snow showers. Seasonably chilly for the playoff game is the description on AccuWeather.com for those going bundled warm. Mike, we've got a really fun show. Before we get in it, I know we're not a basketball podcast, but hell of a week for Notre Dame women's basketball.
Ogunbowale for the win. Good!
I can listen to that soundbite over and over and over again. Niele Ivey, huge win over UConn this week. That's our third top 5 victory. So again, I know this is focused on football, but a big week for Irish athletics. You're kicking things off, going to the playoff. But Mike, for what we've got in store today, what's the agenda look like for today's episode?
Yeah, so to start, we're going to do our typical preview of our upcoming opponent, which in this case is the IU Hoosiers. So we're going to start with that. We'll go into detail on how we think their offense and defense stacks up. What are their strong position groups? What are their weak position groups? What they do well, what they don't do well. We'll call out key players, and then we'll discuss how we think Notre Dame stacks up against that. What we think are the key matchups. And then to finish up the show, Brett and I had a fun idea based on a segment that the Solid Furball has done. And so what we're going to do is Brett and I basically each have a list of, let's call them kind of pie in the sky fantasy scenarios that we would be overjoyed if they happen, but they're very unlikely. I think we kind of used a general rule that if it feels like it has like a less than 10% chance of happening, that's the type of thing that you want to include on your list. So Brett and I, what we're going to do is we're going to go back and forth and we're going to have a bit of a draft on these fantasy items. So it could be scenarios for Notre Dame in the playoff. It could be scenarios for Notre Dame for certain position groups. It could be something with recruiting. It could be something with, something the administration does that helps the football program. But basically the idea is it's something with the football program that we would love to see happen, but is not that likely. And I'm curious, Brett has like hinted that he's been cooking one of these ideas for like, I don't know. I can't remember. What'd you say? Like 12 years or something like
Over
that?
12 years in
It's
the
been a long
making.
time.
So I'm very excited. I can barely contain my excitement.
Yeah, I took a different approach. I just sat down. I was like, all right, next 20 minutes, let's just like fire out a bunch of ideas. So I just like fired a bunch out on my couch not that long ago, actually. So yeah, it'll be fun. I'm excited. So it should be a great show. And yeah, I mean, with that, let's dive into IU. Brett, you want to kick off the segment?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been covered a lot if you're following college football this year. Kurt Signetti, his first year at Indiana, and he was asked, "Well, how do we kind of know you're going to win?" In his like first ever Big Ten Media Day press conference, and he said, "Google me. Winning's what I do." So he brings a fiery, upbeat personality. My other really awesome story was when they introduced him to Indiana. It was during basketball season, and so he went to an IU Purdue game. Purdue, clearly IU's big basketball rivalry, and he at a TV time on the basketball game, the stadium announcer like gives Signetti the microphone, and the quote was, "I know this is a basketball school, but I don't take the backseat for anybody. Purdue sucks, we know that, but so does Michigan and Ohio State." And like the place erupted, and he like stormed off the court, and like everyone was going nuts. So it brings a big positive, like we're gonna take on the world mentality, and it's been really successful. He's been an assistant coach for 27 years at places like Pittsburgh and NC State, but notably spent 4 years as an assistant for Saban's first 4 years, including winning a title at Alabama. He went to a D2 school, IUP. He went to Elon at FCS, and then most notably James Madison, and he's won everywhere, helped transition that program from FCS to FBS. He's won 8 conference championships. He's a 5-time conference coach of the year. So a very, very successful coach, but not necessarily at the D1 level. So not a lot of folks know him. And what's really interesting about this roster is he brought in 31 transfers, 13 coming over from James Madison, where he was just coaching. So he kind of is not necessarily doing this with 4 and 5 star recruits. Indiana, not a big recruiting school. Over time, I'm sure that's a goal for Signetti. But right now, this is very much build it with program guys, scheme guys, guys he knows and has coached up before at different levels. And they've had a phenomenal 11-1 season. But Mike, maybe before we get into all the stats of why this is such a good team, I think the other big narrative we've spent a lot of time talking about, and the media, ESPN, Saban, like whoever you listen to, has made it known to the universe, is IU strength of schedule. Probably worth a minute or two for us discussing as well.
Definitely. And look, they play in the Big Ten, but their strength of schedule this year did work out to where it wasn't the toughest schedule in the world. So their strength of schedule ranked 68th on ESPN. Notre Dame, this was a year that was weaker than what we typically have from a schedule standpoint. We were 58th, so it's not like we're dramatically better, but in terms of what we've seen from a lot of these other college football playoff contenders, the strength of schedule here definitely falls behind what you see from a team like Georgia, for instance. And even within that, they only played one game against a top 25 team. So again, they haven't been tested that often against top competition. And only one game played against a team with 8 or more wins. Michigan is actually their only win against a team with a record above 500. And in that game, it was pretty close. They only beat Michigan 20-15. So pretty tight game. They weren't exactly lighting the world on fire on offense. So there is some question here about how a team like IU performs against top competition. And with that thought, I'm going to double click into the Ohio State game here because I think it does deserve a double click. That was their one big test against an elite level competitor. And the score was 38-15. So, it was a game where they certainly, I don't think, showed up and played how they would have liked. They did hold Ohio State to 316 yards. But the interesting thing here is that the Buckeyes were actually pretty efficient. They were 22 for 26 passing, rushed for 115 yards on 4 yards per attempt. That's okay. But where Ohio State really struggled was with penalties. And I think if that weren't the case, the score is probably a bit more lopsided than 38-15. They had a 46% success rate. They only allowed a 13% havoc rate. So look, it's not Ohio State's best day in the office, but they were still pretty efficient. These stats I'm mentioning were still pretty good. Obviously, they would have liked for them to be even better. But I think when you look at that, that tells you that Ohio State definitely left more on the table. I felt like, as I mentioned before, this felt like a game that could have been a little bit more lopsided than what ended up happening. What really was the problem here, though, was IU's offense. Their defense held up pretty well, even though Ohio State was efficient. I mean, look, Ohio State's they have a great offense, so there's no shame in allowing them having a 46% success rate and not getting a ton of havoc. But it was IU's offense, which is what really held them back in this game. They got completely shut down. 8 for 18 passing for 79 yards, only ran for 2 yards per carry. Not surprising that translates into a 36% success rate. And Ohio State was still able to generate a 24% havoc rate. So you're not sitting on schedule. You're allowing the opposing defense to have these types of plays that push you back and make it even more difficult to convert and move downfield. And then they didn't have much explosiveness either. They basically just scored on their opening drive. And then after that, they really didn't generate much until a garbage time touchdown with less than 2 minutes to go. And Brett, I think this is a point that you talk about this, I think in particular a lot. We both do, but I think it just kind of brought back that point of a talent gap. And when you see a team like IU or a team that maybe doesn't have classes of 4 and 5 stars go against a team that actually does, there's always that question is, oh, are they actually going to be able to hang with the team that on paper just has this high end talent?
Totally. I mean, this is one where, Ohio State is the number 3 team in the talent composite. Michigan is number 15, although clearly, Michigan just not exactly, the same roster they had a year ago. They might have, underclassmen that are 4 and 5 stars, but clearly graduated a lot, clearly kind of a reload year for Michigan. And so that one time where Indiana goes up against the top team is where there's clearly a mismatch because Indiana is 57th in the talent composite. They have 0 5 stars and only 10 4 stars. You compare that to Notre Dame. Notre Dame's got 57 4 stars on the field. So there's going to be 57 4 stars wearing a gold helmet and 10 4 stars wearing white and red next Friday night. And look, we've seen that before play out where I think time and time again, even if you statistically are playing really good football, if it's against a weaker strength of schedule and if there's a really big talent gap when you go to the next level, it really changes the game. Like we've seen that for Notre Dame where we maybe have a top 10, 15 team and we go up against Devontae Smith and a Bryce Young led Alabama team and we just look outclassed and you can kind of throw some of the advanced stats out the door. There's an element of that with Indiana. Now, I'm not saying we're Bryce Young and Devontae Smith, but also in that playoff, like we were much more talented than this current Indiana team is. So that's really good context on the talent and the strength of schedule. But after that, everything you can talk about on this Indiana football team is a really, really good team. Like out of the 12 teams in the college football playoff, this is not Arizona State. This is not Boise State. Statistically, this is a better team than Clemson, a better team than SMU. Like this team belongs in the college football playoff. Easy stats to look at. Number 1 in offensive success rate across the entire country. They stay on schedule exceptionally well. They have a rushing attack that is very strong, but this is really all about the passing game. Curtis Rourke is number 2 in Pro Football Focus grades. At quarterback, he's actually number 1 as a passer in Pro Football Focus grades. Pretty much no mobility in his game, so that's the difference kind of between the number 1 and number 2 grade there when you look at overall quarterback. They grade out number 1 at wide receiver on Pro Football Focus. And outside the Ohio State game, they're really good at limiting havoc. They allow just a 13% havoc rate. That's good for 28th in the country. So they stay on schedule. They don't have big negative plays go against them. They don't turn the ball over. They don't get a lot of penalties. They don't take sacks. And then the only downside of that, not the most explosive offense in the world. They rank 96th in explosiveness, so they're not going to light you on fire moving the ball up and down the field with massive chunk plays. This is about staying on schedule, churning out first downs, being hyper efficient, go get points on the board, and then let their defense go and play football and hang on to a lead. That's really been their recipe for success. And really, they've just been blowing teams out outside of that Michigan and Ohio State game with that formula. We'll get into the defense more, but Mike, I think it's worth spending time on Curtis Rourke. I think he's one of the most underappreciated quarterbacks in the country in a ton of metrics. He's better than Sanders and Dylan Gabriel and Cam Ward and Quinn Ewers at Texas. Like he is in a really good statistical place, and I think he's just kind of left out of that national conversation.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned some of these stats already, or at least hinted at them, but he's the number 1 Pro Football Focus passer in college football. And you already called this out, but that's better than Ewers, Sanders, Gabriel Ward, number 1 spot, 27 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions. Fantastic ratio. Completes 70% of his passes. And then interestingly, he excels in the vertical passing game. So they don't have a ton of explosiveness, but they do actually he actually has a very strong average depth of target. So he has an average depth of target of 10.4. That's further downfield than Cam Ward. So it seems like he excels in pushing the ball in the intermediate game. So they're not hitting as many of these total home run balls where they get a touchdown. But it seems like, when the receiver runs like an intermediate to somewhat deep route, that's an area where he does particularly well in. And then on top of that, he has been protected pretty well this year. He's been pressured just 71 times on the year. So he has time to actually hit these receivers when they run some of these longer routes. The 71 pressures on him this year, I think that's third lowest among QBs with at least 300 pass attempts this year. So, like I mentioned, an area that they excel in. But the interesting thing is that when he is pressured, he is sacked 24% of the time. So that percentage of pressure to sacks, his is much higher, which we mentioned before. He's not mobile, so it's not surprising to see that. That was something we actually saw with Jack Cohn. I remember back in the day was that when opposing defenses would get pressure on him, he would tend to go down and take sacks at a higher rate. Riley Leonard is actually sacked on only 11% of the plays when he's under pressure for context. In terms of his physical profile, he is a big quarterback. He's 6'5", 231 pounds. I mentioned he's not very mobile. So he can definitely get sacked if we get some pressure on him. Against an elite defense like Ohio State, he was sacked 5 times on 7 pressures. So Ohio State, when they got pressure on him, they were able to kind of get home most of the time here. And then 4 times on 10 pressures against Michigan. So against really good defensive lines, which I believe Notre Dame has, it seems like they're able to really get him down on the ground here. He doesn't turn the ball over through the air. I mentioned he doesn't have many interceptions, but when he gets hit, he's prone to fumbling it. So he's fumbled the ball 7 times on the year. So he is susceptible to getting strip sacks. So if you get sacks on him, like I mentioned, he's just generally going to be less effective, but you might be able to get him to cough it up. Look, if you give him time and he can sit back and hit these intermediate level throws, I think that's where Notre Dame would have a problem. But I think our defense is, I think for us, I think we have a defensive line that should be able to get pressure on him. And I think that's the key thing is I think we have to get him on the ground. And if we do that, I think he's going to struggle. And I think he'll look like a lot more like the quarterback that we saw versus Ohio State, rather than what he did against a lot of these other teams.
Yeah, it's interesting. He was a 4-year starter at my University of Ohio and transferred over to IU. So a very experienced guy, as you mentioned, 6'5", so kind of has an NFL frame. He's projected as a fourth, fifth round NFL draft pick. So this is not your typical MAC conference transfer. Like he's an NFL talent that's an incredibly good pocket passer. I think one of the better quarterbacks, other than maybe Jade Maeva, that Notre Dame's seen all year. It's hard to think of another guy that we've seen where you think, yeah, Curtis Rourke, probably not as good as that guy. No, this is probably the second best quarterback that ND's seen all year. And it's a very Notre Dame-like passing attack. It's incredibly balanced. They have a clearly defined number one wide receiver, Elijah Surratt. He has 890 yards, but only 2 touchdowns on the year. Goes for 18 yards a catch. He's a little boomer bust, though. He's had 4 games with over 130 yards, but against the likes of Western Illinois, a bad Purdue team, bad Maryland team, bad Northwestern team, he didn't top 65 yards in the other 8 games. He didn't top 40 yards against Ohio State or Michigan. So he's their number one guy, but very boomer bust and has really faded against tougher competition. Their other 4 wide receivers, though, have more than 35 catches on the year. They got 4, 5, 6 different guys they're willing to go to, couple tight ends. It feels a little bit like Notre Dame in that perspective. It feels a little bit like USC in that perspective. I think the difference, though, is that Elijah Surratt should be able to get shut down athletically by a Christian Gray or a Leonard Moore. He's a guy that was another transfer, another FCS transfer on this roster. He's actually not even projected to get drafted in the NFL. He's projected to be an undrafted free agent at the next level. And so this is a scenario where it's not like USC's running out a bunch of 4 and 5-star speed demons that are just hard to catch up with. This is more quantity of medium to high quality, but because of really good route runners, really good scheme, just really good, well coached football, not necessarily elite talent. I think that's a big time advantage for Notre Dame, who also has arguably the best, depending what metric you look at, for sure, top 3 secondary in the country. Yes, this is, kind of like, why did USC beat us because they had a lot of depth in the passing game? Yes, that's a similarity to Indiana. Talent gap, though, I just think it's not even close to the same page of what Lincoln Riley was able to do. But you stare at these stats and you have to tip your hat to Indiana. There's a reason why they rank in the top 5 in pretty much any passing efficiency metric you look at. Mike, what about the run game?
Yeah, look, the run game is it's good. It's effective. The passing game is what makes this offense operate at such a high level, but they do have an effective run game, and it's driven by a two-headed monster, if you want to call it that, with Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton. So Ellison, 811 yards, 10 touchdowns. In terms of his recruiting profile, he was a three-star recruit transferred from Wake Forest. Lawton, 634 yards and 12 touchdowns. Unranked prospect, interestingly, who moved up from a FCS program. So one thing with the run game is they're effective at generating a solid success rate, not a whole lot of explosiveness. These guys are not really home run threats. For example, Lawton, he doesn't have a carry over 30 yards all season. So they're pretty good at keeping IU on schedule, although less so against better defenses that they face, less so against Michigan, less so against Ohio State. One reason that you don't see them break as many runs for touchdowns like we've seen with Notre Dame, like we see someone with Jeremiah Love, is that they're not the shiftiest. 42 missed tackles between the two of them, and that's about one every 6 carries. Not terrible, but Jeremiah Love, on the other hand, he's for context, he's been breaking a tackle pretty much every other carry. So these guys, they're pretty much doing their job. They're doing more than that. Like they're doing their job at an effective level, but it's not really what's you don't see a ton of flashy plays from these guys. I think a lot of it is driven by offensive line play. So we mentioned the offensive line has done a good job protecting the quarterback. I think they've also done a good job helping these running backs get some space. A lot of that's driven by just consistency throughout the season. For the 5 linemen haven't missed a series this season. That is an area that they've tended to do well. That's an area that IU has done well in this year and on the offensive line. Now, bringing all this together, SP Plus has this as the number 13 offense. So maybe not elite, but near elite, I think is fair to say. For context, Louisville, they had the number 9 offense per SP Plus. USC was number 16, and Texas A&M is number 28. So we have gone up against similar teams. I feel like this offense feels a bit more like the Cardinals than say a team like USC, and I think that's just because there's a heavy use of transfer portal, so that's something that's consistent. But they're not. It's not a whole lot of 4 and 5 star talent. It's guys who have stepped up from smaller recruiting profiles. They've stepped up from smaller programs, and they've really kind of they've been able to, I guess, get as much out of their potential as possible. It's not a like again, it's not you don't have guys that are going to go on and be first round picks. So look, really good offense, but there are a few data points. There are a few elements here that would suggest that Notre Dame shouldn't be overwhelmed. Like we've certainly faced other good offenses this year. This seems like one that we should be able to handle, assuming that we show up on Friday and play our A game.
Completely agree. I think this is where Notre Dame has the biggest advantage just from a talent perspective. On defense, a really similar story. It's a top 15 unit. SP Plus efficiency metrics has this as the number 10 defense in the country. And I think it's important to note this defense has held up really well, albeit not as many data points. And so in that Ohio State game, they held Will Howard to just 200 yards passing for a very lethal Ohio State passing attack. But more impressively, they held Ohio State to just 115 rushing yards, so under 325 yards of total offense. Now, I get it. You look up at the scoreboard and they gave up 38 points, but it was a 14-7 game midway through the third quarter before Ohio State ripped off a punt return touchdown, really flipped momentum. And Indiana's offense just kept punting the ball back to Ohio State at midfield. Like IU's defense was just constantly back against the wall, eventually broke down. They lose that game, in pretty big fashion, again, giving up 38 points, but that was not on IU's defense. They hung in there really, really well. I think I get it. They're both, in that 10 to 15 range, Indiana's offense and defense, but I think their defense is a much stronger formula to do well against other top teams like a Notre Dame. They're number 3 in the country in line yards allowed. Line yards measures how much of the offensive push in the run game is coming from the offensive line versus, say, the running back breaking tackles or just being elusive or making really good plays in the open field. They're number 3 in controlling the line of scrimmage as a defense. They're number 3 in passing explosiveness allowed. They just don't get beat for big plays. And they're number 6 in generating havoc at a 22% clip. So they are generating a lot of disruptive plays, a lot of pass deflections, a lot of sacks, a lot of tackles for loss, a lot of turnovers. they're doing all of those things really well. And you really got to split hairs to find a weakness. Like the the only two I found is they're 35th in tackling. But I mean, that's still pretty darn good to be a top 35 tackling team. They are 71st in run explosiveness allowed. They're a little susceptible to giving up big plays in the run game. And Notre Dame is number one in that category on offense. We are the number one offense in the country at generating big explosive plays. When you look at what percent of our offense comes from big chunky run plays, we are the top team in the country relying on that. And it's maybe one Achilles heel for IU that stood out to me.
Yeah, agree. I whereas their offense has performed well generally this year, the one time that they were truly stress test, they didn't perform as well. With the defense, they held up pretty well against Ohio State. Look, not perfect. Ohio State still put up some good numbers, but they didn't get run off the field like it felt like they're like was happening with their offense. These advanced stats show that they excel at pretty much everything. They limit explosive passing plays. They limit explosiveness generally, although they give, as you mentioned, Brett, they give up a little bit in the run game. They don't allow a great success rate, and then they also generate havoc. So there are pieces here to where I definitely wouldn't be surprised, if they came out looking good against us. If I'm calling out a couple guys on IU's defense, just to be familiar with who their key contributors are, D'Angelo Pons, great lockdown corner. Aiden Fisher, Jalen Walker, two great linebackers in the middle. And Mikhail Kamara is a great edge rusher, 10 sacks on the year, generated 59 pressures, but interestingly, 0 against Ohio State. So he seems to really feast against the bottom of their schedule, and then he's struggled a bit against top competition. And he's one of those JMU transfers. So as I was going through this, look, I kind of hit the main position groups. I called out a key contributors in the secondary, key contributors in the linebacking group, key contributors on the defensive line. So they do. There's not like one obvious weakness here. Solid coaching. It's ND like in that there's good experience, good production at pretty much every level. Now the difference obviously is Notre Dame is much more talented, and what we'll find out is if we stress test them again, how much are we going to be able to get them to buckle a little bit? I'm curious to hear what your take is on this overall. Now that we've kind of gone through all the pieces of their defense, do you think that this is a good matchup for ND's offense, or do you think it's a bad matchup?
I think it's a really interesting question, especially in light of what you talked about on the strength of schedule, but for offense. We always talk about every data point I've ever seen on strength of schedule is just to the team as a whole, the schedule as a whole. I'd be really interested if there was a strength of schedule for defenses played versus strength of schedule for offenses played, because my guess for Indiana is it might have actually been a top 30 or 40 strength of schedule for testing their offense against good Big Ten defenses. But this seems like a bottom 30, bottom 40, like easiest schedule in terms of offenses they faced. But I think it's a bad matchup for Notre Dame's offense. We've talked about a lot of defenses this year where they might have been really good at stopping explosive passing teams. Like they were built to stop explosive deep ball spread offenses. I'm thinking of Texas A&M and Louisville and Navy and like a bunch of others where they were designed at let's not give up the big play. And we said, okay, that's not our style anyways. Like we're not trying to chuck it deep and run a spread offense. But where they were maybe weaker was in the front seven. Where they were weaker was we would have an opportunity to move the ball running, or maybe they struggled at tackling, or they struggled at something we were designed to take advantage of. IU's elite at controlling the line of scrimmage. They are a pretty darn good tackling team. They are designed to take away big explosive plays, yes, but first and foremost, they have been incredibly stingy at the line of scrimmage. So it's very much a strength on strength. I don't see in this IU defense a very obvious, yep, Mike Denbrock's going to be able to just go out and absolutely take advantage of that, hit the go button, and do it over and over and over and over again and run away with this game. I think it really just begs the question, as we've been talking about, it's a really hard assessment on limited data points against other good offenses, and it's a really limited assessment against how they hold up on a talented team like Notre Dame. But I think we're going to have to either win in the passing game in a way we haven't, which it's going to be cold and snowy, and Riley Leonard's an Alabama kid, or we're going to have to break off some explosive plays running. We're going to have Jadarian Price, Riley Leonard, and Jeremiah Love just win that strength on strength against IU's front seven, against their run defense. I feel pretty confident we can do that. Like, I feel pretty confident we can go and manufacture games, go and manufacture points in this game. We've been generating big runs all year against everybody, so why stop now? But I think this is the biggest cautionary tale for Notre Dame fans that, yes, I think we have an advantage in this game. Yes, there's a reason why we're the favorite. This is maybe a good segue into score predictions. Despite that advantage, this IU team is not built to blow out. Like, they are built to stay close in games, to win in big matchups, to hang in there. And I think it's a really tough matchup for Notre Dame's offense to, feel like I would have a hard time betting Notre Dame goes and runs off 42 points in this game. It just, that feels really, really tough to do against IU's defense, unless if you do what Ohio State does and just absolutely shut down the other side of the ball and just keep putting your offense in a position to just have easy points handed to you. For example, go get a big punt return halfway through the game and flip momentum. If you're not doing that, it's tough to see this IU defense getting run over.
Yeah, I agree. So ESPN, they have us winning this 74% of the time. SP Plus gives a 5-6 point spread. And then Vegas, the line opened at 7.5. It's since went up to 8, and there's an over and under of 50. So it's essentially implying Notre Dame wins a 28-21 ball game. Your take on the spread is pretty similar to mine. I think it is. I wish that we had more data points of IU against top teams. We really only have one. And so I can only use the data that I have. And based on that, that tells me that IU, I think their offense is a little bit more prone to shutting down against top competition when that happens, and that their defense is going to hold up a little bit better. And I expect that we're gonna see that in this game. Now, I don't think that I think their offense will hold up a little bit better than they did against Ohio State. They've had some time to look back on the tape, and I'm sure they're going to do a few things a little bit differently. And then also Ohio State, honestly, they're also more talented than us. So I think my overall view of this is I like our defense against pretty much anyone. The only offenses that have given me pause this year are the ones with a deep bench of elite, speedy wide receivers. Emphasis on the speedy. So that's your Texases, your Ohio States, your Oregons of the world. IU, they have good wide receivers, productive, very technically sound, guys who grade out well on Pro Football Focus grade, but not. They don't have as much horsepower, as much firepower as some of these other teams. So I think our secondary, I think we get back to the standard that we were setting before USC, where we're not giving them a whole lot. I think Rourke is sitting back, trying to find open receivers. And I don't think he's going to have as much time as he has in against some of the games against weaker competition. I think it'll be a little bit more similar to Ohio State. I think he's not going to see a whole lot of separation from his receivers, and he's going to have a little less time to be able to distribute it to his receivers. And I think that's going to result in a passing game that looks a bit more like what we saw against Ohio State. Maybe not as severe as that. Like they might play. I wouldn't be surprised if they play a bit better. They've shown that they are a good offense, obviously, throughout most of the year. Again, you got to put stock in the Ohio State game, but you don't want to put too much stock into it. And the run game, effective but not dominant. I think we should be able to hold that in check as well. So I think our defense plays to our standard, limits points, and then flipping to the other side of the ball, I think our offense, as I mentioned before, is trending the right way. But based on that Ohio State data point, I like the odds of the IU defense that we saw against Ohio State and that we saw for much of the rest of the season. I expect to see that defense, and so I don't think they're going to allow us to just run the ball down their throat. I think that's going to be tough. We might be able to break off some explosive plays. I would be thrilled if Riley Leonard's able to dice them up in the secondary, but I'm not necessarily expecting that. So I think our offense is at a point to where we should be able to manufacture points. I like how you phrased that, Brett. I think we'll do enough to secure enough points to win this game by a decent margin. I think we'll have a few big explosive run plays. I think Riley Leonard is efficient. I think maybe not dominant, but I think he does enough to get us some points. So if I put all that together, that gives me a margin of victory around 30-20. I think we win by 10 points. I think our offense does enough to get us a solid margin of victory. We're not putting up 50 points, but we put up 30, which is solid. And um, look, I think IU play. I think they play a little bit better on offense than they did against Ohio State, but not the same IU offense that we've seen against the weaker part of their schedule.
Most teams that score 30 points score 3 touchdowns and kick 3 field goals. I would be shocked if Notre Dame kicks 3 field goals with the way our kicking game has gone in the snow in South Bend. So I'm totally okay if you predict 30 to 20, but I think you're going to have to get there by way of 4 touchdowns and a safety. But
I'm
my
okay.
score,
I'm okay. However, we get there.
however you get to 30. So my score prediction is very
Yeah.
similar. I'm at 28 to 13. The thing I have the most confidence in going through this preview is the mismatch that Al Golden has on talent. We've been talking on this podcast now for a couple of years with Al Golden defenses. If you give him any mismatch, a team that struggles against the pass, a team that struggles against the run, a team that struggles generating big plays, a team that's turnover prone, or a team where just Al Golden has a talent mismatch. Al Golden will take advantage. Now, yes, IU is very balanced. Yes, statistically, they've had an awesome year on offense, but there's data points out there when they go up against other top defenses, not just in the Ohio State game, but say that Michigan game, they really
Yep.
struggle. And you add a little bad weather to that. And look, I was actually thinking about going 28 to 7. Like, I'm pretty darn bullish on Al Golden shutting down this IU team. On the other side, though, I don't see a way for us to really go put up 40 points in this game. I hope it happens. I would love if it happens. I think if it does, you're talking about pick sixes or scoop and scores. Like, you're going to need defense and special teams to go help out to really overpower this IU defense and put them in a bad spot. So I've got it 28 to 13. I think we beat the spread. But I'm telling you, going through this preview at first, I was like, it's IU. They're 11-1, weak strength of schedule. I bet they have a weakness. Like, I bet there's something we can exploit. It's not there. Like, you go up and down the metrics. They're a great passing team. They're a great receiving team. They're top 25 running the ball. They're top 5 rush defense. They're top 10 pass rush. They're top 15 in coverage. Like, you just keep looking everywhere and it's like, what's the weakness? And so the only thing is talent. And I think Al Golden will dominate that. I think Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love, Mike Denbrock figure out enough to get out of South Bend with a comfortable victory. But I think it's much more likely to be close game than it is for Notre Dame to walk away with a blowout in this one.
Yeah, look, I mean, in many ways, IU resembles a version of Notre Dame, especially on defense. It's just on offense, they lean much more into the passing game than we do. So it's just, it's just on paper a less talented version of Notre Dame in many ways.
Absolutely. So let's move into the segment I've been most excited about here for the last week or two since we came up with this one to record. We are doing the college football Notre Dame playoff fantasy things draft, as Mike, you said in the preview. We're going to say this isn't fantasy football, like how many yards and points do we think, players we get that we're drafting. This is things we would view as a fantasy. It'd be a dream come true if they happen, but they are very unlikely. So, Mike, I'm curious, how many do you have on your list? I have 5.
I have 7.
7.
So, but
Okay.
I don't have to. I don't have to. I don't have to do them all.
I'll let you go first. We'll rotate, and if we happen to
Okay.
duplicate one, whoever says it first gets it. But let's have you go first, and that'll leave you an extra one at the end.
Yeah, I want to preface that Brett and I both uploaded share docs on our podcast drive. So technically I could look and see what Brett has on the drive. I could
Yeah, I
just
did
be a
password
total chaos
protect it.
agent here. Oh, yours is password protected? Okay. All right.
No, I
Yeah.
did
So
not password protect it.
oh, it's not password protected. Okay.
No.
Yeah. So I could go in and I could just pick Brett's number one. But I don't know, like this is all in good faith. And I'm not going to be a chaos agent here. So my first one, and I'm gonna preface this that to my knowledge, the university has not announced anything related to this yet for the college football playoff. But I'm gonna say that Notre Dame, a fantasy for me, is that Notre Dame reverses course and they announce that they will begin starting alcohol in the stadium
Mm.
going forward, starting with the home college football playoff game versus IU. Now, look, they might. I actually don't. I was looking around. I have no idea if they're actually selling alcohol in the stadium. They have for special events. They don't for Notre Dame football games. What's interesting to me is like, is this going to be considered a typical Notre Dame football game, or is this more of a special event? They haven't said anything yet. So kind of with that limited knowledge out here, that I want to make that qualification. But for me, it would be fun if they did that moving forward. And actually, I think that there's a lot of data out there that says that it's actually a better environment. It's kind of counterintuitive. It's a bit of a better environment for the fans, because what ends up happening when you don't sell alcohol in the stadium is fans end up just ripping shots. They end up just having a ton of alcohol right before they go into the game. They'll sneak in flasks. And so they, in many ways, they actually a lot of times will end up drinking more aggressively than they would otherwise. Whereas if you can go to the stadium and get a beer, you kind of spread it out a little bit more. And that data has actually been proven out from a lot of schools that have shifted their policy from no alcohol to alcohol. So
Hmm.
I think with Brett and I both going to the game in less than a week, I thought that would be a fun one.
I think that's a great take. I would love to drink a Guinness with you in the stadium, Mike. I was reading Pete Sampson over the weekend, and he was writing that apparently the college football playoff is putting a damper on very one sided displays in the stadium. So, for example, after our
Yeah.
big warm up intro, IU will get to play whatever their intro song is. I'm curious though, will they get to go out of the big tunnel, or do they still have to go, through our like single file only visitors tunnel? I'm curious if any of that will change. I'm curious. It sounds like the whole advertising mass after the game and like all the different kind of highlighting professors and research and like kind of more Notre Dame type things. It sounds like some of that might get a damper, and that the college football playoff, a neutral third party, will decide replays shown on the screen. There's a couple of like interesting wrinkles that I think, but they're very quiet about this. Same with the alcohol sales. Like no one's really talking about it in a big way. And I'm very curious to see how this plays out. If it looks and feels like a Notre Dame football game, or are there any things we're not quite used to, right? Like the, leprechaun's
Yeah.
not, hiding the shamrock underneath his hat and, switching it around for the kids to guess 1, 2, 3, which by the way, I hate those gimmicky things on scoreboards. Like just focus on the football game. And I feel like whenever that happens, you take the crowd out of it. But it sounds like some of that might be dampered anyways.
Yeah, put an ESPN logo on the leprechaun. That would
Exactly.
that would be yeah, just lean into the sponsorship. I don't yeah, Brett, I've been seeing a lot of the same stuff too. I had heard that like a lot of the operational elements were going to be controlled by the university. So
Oh,
that
okay.
to me meant like stuff like what you show on the screen for
Jumbotron.
replays. Yeah, so they
Okay.
could kind of pick what they want to show. But in terms of kind of like those timeout segments or interquarter segments, it sounds like, yeah, as you mentioned, Brett, it sounds like we're not going to have a lot of control over that. And then you mentioned
Yeah.
the element where IU they get their big intro, unclear whether or not they're going to be able to run out of the small tunnel or not. I hope maybe what we should do is if we have a big tunnel, we should install like a movable barrier, and so we run through the big tunnel, but then it just like squeezes it. It's kind of like I'm going to do a Star Wars reference here. It's kind of like when they're trapped in the in the trash pit and just kind of converges in. I think something like that would be pretty cool. Be very fitting. It'd be very fitting actually. ESPN owned by Disney, which also owns Star Wars. You could
There
they
you
could
go.
get a little free Star Wars marketing in there.
So the other thing that I meant to bring up at the preview, and then I promise we'll get on with the draft. Um, I've been reading a lot about ticket sales for this game. And one, Notre Dame has cut off ticket sales to only Notre Dame alumni and benefactors of the university. So it didn't go anywhere outside of that. Now, I heard an interesting theory from someone close to the university that they're worried about the number of Notre Dame fans in the South Bend community that are maybe faculty, staff, or local benefactors that are season ticket holders, but are actually bigger IU basketball fans than they are Notre Dame football fans. They just live in Indiana.
Hmm.
So that even some of that ticket allotment actually maybe made its way into Indiana territory by way of course, the geographical proximity. Now, all of that being said, if
Hmm.
you go on StubHub, I saw about 1,000 listings. So even if you said, they average somewhere between 2 to 4 for your typical listing, let's just even take the high end and say those 1,000 listings are 4,000 tickets. And at that point in time, they had announced they were selling about 400 tickets a day. So let's even say double that 4,000 number for the number that had already sold by the time I checked this after tickets had been out for 4 or 5 days. I think at most you're talking about 6 to 8 thousand tickets on the secondary market at most. Like I think Notre Dame has done a very good job of really clamping down on outside ticket sales by limiting them to alumni and benefactors. And even if you said 100% of those tickets on the secondary market went to IU fans, plus whatever the NCAA or the college football playoff kind of requires is the allotment to the visitors, I think it's really unlikely you see a sea of red, especially Notre Dame's now moved away from giving an opposing team like one section. Instead, they sprinkle them like one or two rows in every section to spread them out. So I'm hopeful this is a really great game day environment. I'm hopeful that comes with a Guinness. I think that would be awesome. Moving on in the fantasy draft, I'm going to start off with my top choice. I'm so incredibly excited for this idea that I've had 12 years in the making, and I'm going to preview it with a little history. In 2012, the University of Louisiana Monroe, no, not my hometown of Ulm, Minnesota. They go by ULM, not New Ulm, Minnesota, but the University of Louisiana Monroe pulled out what they called the fun row offense. And they had two quarterbacks on the field at the same time for every single game. And whenever I get bored during like any watching college football game, it's very likely that if I start getting bored, I pull up YouTube clips of that ULM offense from 2012. They beat a top 10 Arkansas team on the road to open the season as 30-point underdogs. They then took on both Auburn and Baylor and had them on the ropes in one score losses. And I've been dying to see another team do this where it wasn't like for a wrinkle. They had two quarterbacks on the field at the same time. One was more mobile than the other. They'd line up a running back next to them in shotgun, and they would basically play a triple option, but two of the guys could easily take off and roll out bootleg and pass the ball as well. And it was dynamic. It was awesome. I'll never forget, like, they did it against Baylor, who had seen it on film, but they added in different wrinkles in the second game of the year. And Baylor had to use all three of their timeouts in the first half on defense just to keep regrouping as like ULM just went up and down the field on them. So, my fantasy things draft that I think is highly unlikely, but that we have been practicing with Tyler Buckner as QB 1.2 since the offseason. Like since he transferred back as a walk-on onto the football team, Tyler Buckner, who was our starting quarterback 2 years ago, who threw what, 6 touchdowns in a bowl game and set Notre Dame records against South Carolina. I think he has been sitting in the wings playing as the co-quarterback with Riley Leonard this entire season, and Freeman and Denbrock have kept it under wraps. We'll then rotate Love and Price as RB2, and we will have the two of them on the field for like the entire playoffs, just pretending to hand it off, not hand it off to one of them. One of them passes it, one of them doesn't pass it, one of them then pitches it to Jeremiah Love, and just run a pure chaos misdirection offense with Mitch Evans and Jaden Thomas and Faison and Great House just having a field day of blowing past safeties downfield. That's my fantasy dream.
I'll do you one better. Like, why not three? How about get Minchie into the mix? Have three quarterbacks back there.
Well, no, because we need to keep Jeremiah Love on the field.
Well, okay, yeah, all right. I mean, we'll rotate. So it's like you got the
We'll
two.
rotate.
You got Buckner. Yeah, you got Buckner and Leonard on the field at all times, and then sometimes you have. I guess if it's like if it's a 3rd and 10, then maybe you have Minchie out there instead of Jeremiah Love. But then if it's like a 3rd and 3, then that's more of a. Although I guess
Sure.
if I'm being realistic here, we for some reason we don't put Jeremiah Love out there on 3rd down, so it would be Jadarian Price in that situation.
Exactly. So that's
a good. Dude, that'd be fun.
I'd love to I want
mean,
Tyler Buckner getting 50 snaps a game the rest of the way. That's my dream.
I mean, we've done some gimmicky stuff with Buckner already this year that's worked pretty well, mostly on special teams.
Mostly on special teams.
So I'm sure. Look, I don't know if this is going to happen, but I bet there will be some wrinkles with Buckner that there's some cards along those lines that we haven't seen yet. So
for sure, to be clear, I think if Buckner comes in for a package or a wrinkle with Leonard on the field at the same time, this counts as having happened. But I would be ecstatic if it was like the entire game.
Yeah. That's a good one. I'm trying. I feel like we've discussed two quarterbacks on the field at some point. I feel like we have at some point. I'm just trying to like.
We've talked about this.
Not at this level of detail though. But I think probably when you mentioned it, I don't think you had mentioned that you had been kind of cooking in your head for years. I think it was just kind of like, oh, that's an interesting thought that we just threw
Yeah,
out.
like I still know the
Um,
two quarterbacks were Colton Browning and Cody Wells. Like I still know the two quarterbacks from Louisiana of Monroe. Yeah, I've been thinking about this
yeah,
one for a
yeah.
while.
Okay, so my next one is you're gonna like this one. Benjamin Morrison announces at some point in the next few weeks. I know he had hip surgery, so the time I don't know what the timetable
Hmm.
for that is. I have to assume it's a lot. We should get one of our doctor friends to give some insight here. But I'm gonna ignore that, like the realistic of how realistic it is to come back from hip surgery in this time frame. And I'm going to say that Ben Morrison announces he will be healthy by the national championship. And I'm assuming in this situation that we make the national championship. And then on top of that, he announces he's returning next year.
Oh, interesting. And he comes back. I have been tracking it. He's fallen from like a top 10 pick to late first round, early second, which is shocking to
Yeah,
me that
yeah,
people forget just how, like, he played 8, 9 games this year and it's not like he put up bad film. Like, he was dominant again. But I just think, he's had the shoulder
yeah,
injury. Now he's got the hip injury. Like, I
yep.
think that's really hurt
It's
his draft.
injuries.
Yeah. That actually makes it more surprising for me if he would come back to risk further injury and further falling down a draft board.
Yeah,
But I do think it'd be an amazing, albeit unlikely thing if he comes back here for the college football playoff.
yeah.
All right. My
And
next
Brett,
one.
look, it's a
Yeah.
dream scenario, so I can make anything I want to happen here. I can just assume that he'll be
Sure.
totally healthy the entire time. The scenario, so yeah, I
Totally.
mean, basically, I'm a healer in the scenario. I'm like Jesus. I can just like touch someone and they're healed.
There you go. Now, to be clear, this is still like a draft. Like we're trying to get some of these to hit. But yes, okay. My next one,
Yeah,
I think, is realistic. But before I say it, I want to acknowledge this has not happened this year. And I meant to go back and look up when is the last time Notre Dame has gone a season without this occurring. But regardless of position, Notre Dame has not had a 100-yard receiver on the season. So in the second round of our fantasy things draft for the college football playoff, I am going to put on the board that we have a 100-yard receiver in at least one game in one of the upcoming playoff games, depending how far Notre Dame goes.
yeah. Look, I think that's a good one because it's definitely feasible, but I also think it like that 10% threshold that we mentioned. I think it's still honest to that threshold, right? I
Exactly.
don't. I think it's like we haven't seen it yet this year, so less than 10%. That feels like pretty reasonable. We're trending in the right direction, so maybe it feels a little bit more possible. But I mean, that would indicate some explosiveness in the passing game to the extent that we haven't seen yet. So that'd be fun. I mean, look, I think if we have that happen, I'm feeling pretty good about where we're going the rest of the year. My next one, I think I think you'll like this one. I think a lot of our listeners will like this one too. So I'm going to say it would be really fun if Brian Kelly rejoins the staff next year as an analyst.
as, not even as an assistant coach. He's one of those like quality control analysts in the back room studying film for Freeman. Okay. I like that.
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
on board.
Freeman. Yeah. Freeman's coaching staff kind of, what Nick Saban was doing at Alabama. It was kind of the club of like lost souls, right? And then you can kind of come back there and redeem yourself. So it's kind of
Yeah.
envisioning something along those lines.
I've already seen Marcus Freeman on two coaching rumor boards. One was the Chicago Bears. Keep in mind he played for the Bears, albeit briefly. And two was the Ohio State job. Now I think it's very unlikely Freeman goes to the NFL. Like he just doesn't seem built for the NFL the way he is connecting with college kids as a recruiter,
Yeah.
certainly at this stage of his career. Two, Ohio State's his alma mater. Like that would actually not surprise me. And I mean, Notre Dame should be lining up the coffers to back Freeman if we get any whiff of that. But it has dawned on me like Tommy Rees was rumored as the runner up for the UNC job behind Bill Belichick. It crossed my mind that if you said Freeman, for whatever reason, moved on, would Reese come back? I wasn't thinking Brian Kelly. I think that's a whole nother level of intrigue. Okay. So
As an analyst, and also Belichick, I got a point. You said, hey, maybe he can't connect with college kids, but he has shown an ability to connect with young
20.
24-year-old women.
Okay, we're moving down a whole side trade, but I agree, not the point of this show. So next one I've got on my list. Um, Mitch Jeter makes 4 field goals in a game. I don't know when it's going to come up, but I think at some point in this playoff, maybe it's against the Penn State, maybe it's against the Georgia, not at home in the snow in South Bend. So I don't think it's in the first round, but I think at some point we might get mucked up in the red zone. A team might figure out how to kind of stop our very, run heavy red zone attack, and it turns into a field goal game, and we need to go win something, 19-14, and we're doing it with field goal after field goal after field goal. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. If anything, I was thinking about saying Notre Dame doesn't attempt a field goal the rest of the season, but I didn't know if that would meet the 10% threshold. So I flipped it on its head and I said, no, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no. We go and win a game by just going field goal crazy. The more I thought about it, I don't love this one because I hate punting. I hate kicking field goals. Like the analytics are just so heavy on go for it, go for it, go for it, that we're always talking about being more aggressive in those scenarios. So this is making 4 field goals, and not because we're like not going for it on 4th and goal from the 2, but this is more, look, we're in a situation where we just need an unsung hero who struggled with injuries, struggled getting healthy, struggled getting back into the flow of that kicker routine, and comes through and has a huge moment. The pride and joy of Salisbury, North Carolina, Mitch Jeter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that him pulling that off, I think it's more likely if we go further into the playoff. So one, he has more time to get back into the swing of things, reestablish his rhythm, and then two, the further you get into the playoff, you're just going to be facing. Your odds are you're going to be facing better defenses. So it's more likely we get in that situation where we have to kick it. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I would
By
love to
the
see
way,
Jeter get back to the kicker that we know that he can be.
totally. But by the way, on Salisbury, North Carolina football, I think I mentioned this on the show before, and hopefully Notre Dame gets a matchup with him. But Jalen Walker just won the Butkus Award for Georgia, linebacker, best linebacker in the country. Went to Ann's elementary school, and Ann's mom was one of his teachers. So shout out Sacred Heart, shout
Oh,
out
okay.
Salisbury, North Carolina. Jalen Walker, his younger brother, my mother-in-law actually had in his class. His younger brother now plays at Georgia State, I think. So both of them are at the D1 level. Awesome family. Like every story about him in the community is like wildly, incredibly positive. And we've been watching his journey for years now. So another Salisbury shout out. All right, Mike, kick us off into
Yeah.
the third round of the draft. What do you got for us?
All right, so this one is inspired by some recruiting developments at Michigan that happened in the last month. So, in this scenario, we discover a high profile multi billionaire. So, think someone like Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos is either secretly is secretly a big Notre Dame fan, or they have a family member who is, like a wife. And then they proceed to make a massive donation to our NIL collective. So, and that's pretty much exactly what
Okay.
happened to Michigan recently.
Do we know whose Michigan is? I don't know anything about this story.
It's Larry Ellison. So Larry Ellison's wife is a huge Michigan
Oh,
fan.
interesting.
Yeah, and so they made he made like he put a lot of, I don't know how much money it was. Actually, I'm sure if you dig around on message boards, you could probably find the
Got
figure.
it.
But basically
Mhm.
he put up a lot of money and then they were able to take the number one quarterback.
Interesting. Not like, say, Warren Buffett is a massive Nebraska fan. I don't understand how like they haven't figured out how to get some Berkshire stock to send to the kids on the Nebraska football team. But interesting. So
I
we need
mean,
a big time benefactor to step in with like $1 billion check for NIL.
yeah, I mean, look, Warren Buffett's not giving any money to Nebraska because he at the end of the day, he's an ROI guy, and I don't think he could
Yeah,
justify the
no,
ROI
yeah,
on that
that's not
investment.
compounding. No, that's true. Okay, man.
Nope.
Okay, so you've started going very non like football. I very much stuck within the 4 lines. So with my next pick of the draft, I'm gonna go with the Tom Zibikowski game, where we are going to have a punt return for a touchdown instead of the usual fair catch after fair catch after fair catch. I'm going to say we have the Tom Zibikowski game, and Notre Dame pulls off a massive punt or kick return to flip it. Maybe I could have said rocket, but I went with Tom Zibikowski because normally we're running back, very unathletic walk-ons. Not that Zibikowski is unathletic or a walk-on, but they more resemble Tom Zibikowski than they maybe did the rocket. So I'm going to punt return for a touchdown in the playoff. Flips momentum in a big game.
Dude, that would be electric. So Brett and I, like, so our seats they're going to be kind of in the end zone, and
Yep.
in a scenario where they're returning it to where we're at, That would be absolutely electric. So I really hope that that happens. And probably about, I think 10% or less, that feels about right for something like this. Possible, but it's not something you see in most games, obviously. So my next one, I'm going to get back to the theme of more near term football consequences. And so I'm going to say this next fantasy of mine for Notre Dame football. It's always kind of funny to phrase things as this next fantasy of mine. But my next fantasy for Notre Dame football, particularly for the college football playoff, is that Riley Leonard elevates from a good passing quarterback, which is where I think he is right now, to great, to top tier, making a jump so significant that it actually puts him in the conversation to be a first round NFL pick. And I think if that
Whoa.
happens, I think if that happens, then we're looking at a pretty decent shot at a national title.
Like just in these next 4 games.
Yes, he's just like on fire
Okay.
against top competition. Yeah, like who is
It was from
God,
fifth
the
round
Ohio State
draft pick
quarter.
to top 10.
He's just like shredding. He's like, going up
Yeah.
against top defenses and absolutely shredding them. So look,
Okay.
I didn't say it's not likely, right? But it falls under 10%.
Okay. I'm going to stick with one that I said all year long. I said I didn't think Notre Dame would give up 20 points in a game, and they did twice against Louisville and USC. And in that Louisville game, I maintain offensive turnovers led to Louisville punts where they had 14 of their 24 by starting the drive in Notre Dame's red zone. So I've now come up with a different concept. I'm going to call it net points allowed, where we don't look at um, any special teams or defensive touchdowns we give up. And if the other team starts a drive in the red zone, it only counts as like that doesn't count either. It's also offset by any special teams or defensive touchdowns we have. So if we give up 21 points, but we have a pick six, that would net to 14. So a net point concept. Notre Dame doesn't give up 15 net points in a game the rest of the year. So before I said 20, I'm clarifying to make it a little bit better of a defensive metric, but I'm upping the ante and I'm saying we don't give up 15 net points the rest of the way.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So for my next one, I'm going to do, let's see, I'm looking at my list right now. I'm deciding which one I want to do. Okay. So I'm going to say that, all right. So in the midst of a very strong showing in the college football playoff and the increased media attention that goes along with it and all the goodwill that we would receive, we received such a bump, I guess, in just the aura around the university that we received commitments from not one, but more than one 5-star recruits, which is
Multiple
something
five
that
stars.
we multiple 5-star recruits, and they stick. And they're not like leaving after half a semester. They don't like commit and then they leave shortly after National Signing Day. These are guys who stick with the program.
When is the last time we've had multiple five stars in a class? I
It's a
should
good question.
probably know
I
that.
would
I mean,
imagine. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine certain recruiting services, like if you look at like maybe there's one year that Rivals has 2 5-star guys that
yeah,
right. Maybe there's another year that
I think it's been a
24/7
long
has
time.
yeah, but consensus 5-star recruits, right? It's been a long time. I mean, there've been a couple years where we've had one like
Yeah.
consensus 24/7. A lot of times those guys they they're not every recruiting service has them as a 5-star. It's like they
Hmm.
are technically a consensus 5-star, but
Hmm.
Rivals might have them a lot lower, and 24/7 has them a little bit better. So yeah, I mean it's something that we haven't seen. There was that recruiting class, that one recent, not this recruiting class, but the one before that. It looked like at one point we were going to be able to get multiple, and then basically all the prospects that we were looking at who were 5-star guys, they all got cold feet and went elsewhere. So um, I look, I don't think this is a crazy one, but I do think just based on what we've seen, and it hasn't happened in such a long period of time, it does feel like it still falls under that 10%, just because we've had so much difficulty recruiting 5-stars.
So I thought you were going to say something in the transfer portal tying in with Notre Dame laxing the undergrad transfer admission standards that's been such a holdup that we go and win a title. There's a big aura to keep it going. And there's a big influx of top tier transfers. For example, like when Alabama's, number one safety, Caleb Downs, went to Ohio State, or their really top wide receiver that was expected to come back is now at Texas in Isaiah Bond. Like I
Yeah.
thought you were going to go on a limb and say we become that team next year. Um, Although arguably that might be a little more realistic than snagging a couple top top 25,
Exactly. Like,
30
yeah, I mean,
undergrad
it
recruits right
sounds
now.
like exactly. Yeah. It sounds like just based on some reporting we've heard from Pete Sampson and a few other people, it sounds like that they were kind of hinting that opening up like the floodgates, so to speak, with the transfer portal is it's a little bit more in process. Now, look, we're not going to be able to take someone who has like a 1.5 GPA from like Ole Miss, right? But we can be a lot smarter about it. And like someone like a Caleb Downs, like we might actually be able to get someone like that in the future.
Hmm.
So it's good.
Hmm.
It's good that we don't include that on this list because that is actually a more realistic scenario.
I gotcha. So I've got one more that I was really worried you're going to say is like your very first thing, but I've been thinking about it the whole time. We technically have, according to Las Vegas, depending what model you look at, a 6 to 8% chance to win the national championship, which is below the 10% threshold. So with my last pick, this is the last one I've got on my list. I've got a very, very simple one. And it's that every single year, actually not every single year, it just started, but a golf trip that I go on, there's a group of Notre Dame guys and non-Notre Dame guys, and so it's Team Notre Dame versus, and each year they change their name to be the number of Notre Dame seasons since we won a title. So last year they were
Oh
Team
man.
36. They're already trash talking us that they're Team 37. So, Ian, my buddy listening to this show, who is on Team Notre Dame with me, my last fantasy things draft is that when we go on our golf trip in the spring, that it is going to be Team Notre Dame against Team Zero because Notre Dame wins a national title.
Yeah, that's a good one. I am surprised that I guess it just kind of felt too obvious maybe. Maybe that's why I didn't pick it. But because obviously that would be if I had to pick one, that would be the one that I would pick. Although Brian Kelly being on staff as an analyst next year, as satisfying as that would be, I would have
You'd
to pick
rather
him.
have that than us win a national title.
I'm not that petty. It would be pretty good though.
Awesome. Oh, I thought
I
you had
kind of had a
one more.
joke one. I was like, man, if I really want to stir the pot, like, right? I was like, Notre Dame decides to join the Big Ten, right? And that's
Okay.
probably there's probably not even the thing. The thing though is like
It
ten
might be more
percent.
than
I don't like.
10%. I think that
It
might
might be
be
more than
10 more.
10%.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, Brett and I have talked. We actually think like at this point the logic for joining a conference, um, if you kind of stack up the advantages of independence versus a conference, at this point, it doesn't like skew as much towards independence as it used to. Like a lot of the
Hmm.
advantages that we had as an independent, we would actually some of them we would actually regain in the Big Ten, whether that's more money from a TV deal because back in the day Notre Dame used to get the most money from a TV deal. A lot of our rivals are now in the Big Ten, so we would regain those rivalries, and that's something that we cherish a lot. And then another big element with Notre Dame is we have to have a national schedule just because our alumni base is all over the place. We recruit nationally. Um, and the Big Ten would allow us to accomplish that. They're all over the place now. So I, uh, I think, look, maybe it wasn't an accident that I picked that one last so I could get on my soapbox here a little bit. I'm totally fine with us as an independent. I think there are still a lot of advantages to it, but it does seem like as time has gone by, it seems like there's certain advantages to joining a conference like the Big Ten that you can't really, it wouldn't be wise to completely ignore them.
Hmm. By the way, from what I can tell, the last time that Notre Dame had multiple 5 stars, according to the composite, was Eshak Williams and Aaron Lynch, who then infamously transferred out after a year back in the class of 2011. I think the last time we had two consensus All Americans in the same class was in 2008 with Dane Christ and Mike Floyd. So for years
Yeah,
on that one,
2008.
we're
Yeah, yeah,
talking,
yeah,
yeah. So we're talking 13 plus years from having two 5 stars, 16 years if you want to talk about a consensus All American. Or sorry, a
yeah,
consensus 5 stars. Sorry, go
yeah. I
ahead.
was gonna say let's just hope Bill Gates is actually a Notre Dame fan, and then maybe we'll have like 15 5-star recruits because we'll each be paying them like $20 million.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, really fun show. Excited to see you in South Bend here in a few days. And until then, Gyrish Nation, let's Gyrish and beat Hoosiers.
Irish beat Hoosiers.